Let's sew a silk skirt for spring. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to be using this little bit of fabric that I got from a mystery box to make a skirt that I think will be so pretty for spring. This actually turned into being a huge learning project, so I'm going to walk you through all of my steps that I did. The first one, since there was no pattern, is I actually draped this. So for draping, you just pin your fabric onto a dress form, and then you kind of just cut out the fabric as you go along into the shape that you're looking for. I thought it'd be really pretty to try to do like a bias cut skirt, which is what I was attempting with this. It just really didn't have that much fabric. So as you can see, it is going to be a shorter skirt, but I'm excited to see how it turns out. Next, I went through and just kind of cut the sides so that it would be much more even on either side, as well as made sure that the waistband around it was also cut so that everything was laying nice and flat and how I was looking for it to be. Now, when I originally did this, I thought it'd be nice to have a pocket on one side as I had a little extra fabric. As we go along, you'll see I do go through all the steps of the pocket, but I decided to get rid of it as it just wasn't really laying that well. Next, I did add a lining as this pink fabric ended up being kind of see-through, and I had this extra lining that came from another mystery box, so I used that as well and just went through and draped that so that I would have the correct sizing and shape for that too. So at this point, I have my two pieces of lining as well as my two pieces of skirt. Now it was time to start working on the pocket, which in a way ended up just being a really great example of how to do a French seam, as I wanted to try to do those since this fabric was kind of fraying, and I thought this would be a really great way to test it out. So with my fabric with the wrong sides together, I ended up sewing the first seam for the first part of the French seam, and I'm going to do a whole video just on how to sew a French seam as well in case you were interested and want to learn about that too. Since this was on a curve, I did clip the corners, and I did the exact same thing for the lining so I could test out my French seam use, and then I pressed all of these seams down so they lay nice and flat and that I could put pins on them to then take that final seam where you're sewing it with the right sides together so that it encases that raw edge. So this is what my pocket ended up looking like. When you look on the inside, you can see that it does look really, really nice, and you cannot see any of those raw edges, and everything came out really cleanly. So now it was time for what I thought was going to be adding the pocket onto the skirt. So I did go through the whole process. I wanted this to also be a French seam since, I was just testing it out. And as you see, I'm sewing it now with the wrong sides together, and then I would go back through. I trimmed all the fabric up so that it was nice and neat, and then did it with the right sides together, and as you can see, pinned it, pressed it, and then I'm going to take that seam there, and I did this for the second side of the pocket too, so that it was on both sides of my fabric, everything was laying nice and smoothly, and I thought that this was going to work out really well. So this is what my pocket was looking like so far. It was okay. I started to notice though that it was getting bulky, but I decided at this point to just keep pushing through. What I did now was I sewed the sides of the skirt that had the pocket on it all the way around so that it would essentially become like one piece of fabric. Then I just had to repeat for the second side, which that was going to be having a zipper. So I just carefully pinned all of this up. And then I wanted to do this also as a French seam to keep practicing, so I sewed this first with the wrong sides together, then trimmed up that edge so that it was nice and neat, and then folded this all over so that it would be then sewed with the right sides together so that I could hopefully encase that edge so that I wouldn't have any of those raw edges. And then I took the seam along there. So once I finally had gotten through this part, I was really getting down the whole French seams. This is what the skirt looked like. You can see it does have a pocket. And when I put this on the dress form, that's when I started to notice it was just really bulky and I didn't like how the pocket was laying. So I know that there's like a weird shadow going on just the way that the sun was hitting this, but I did decide to just fully take out the pocket, and I just trimmed up the fabric so that it was no longer there, and I just went through and sewed the one side of the skirt completely with a French seam without the pocket. So doing it with the wrong sides together, trimming up that edge, and then going back through and pressing this all out so that then I can take that nice seam that will have the right sides of the fabric together that will hopefully then encase the edge so that it's not fraying, it's not getting anywhere. And of course, a French seam, you could also have used a serger. There's lots of different ways. I was just trying out a new technique with this skirt, and I think it actually looks really, really nice, especially with this fabric. Like, it was a very good candidate for testing out this new technique. So now it was time for me to add my zipper. So I had a zipper here. I really wasn't doing anything too fancy with this. I just wanted to make it so the skirt would be able to come on and off since I wasn't adding an elastic waistband. So I just used my zipper foot and my zipper, sewed it up one side, and then repeated this for the second side. I have another video where I actually had inserted a zipper as well into a skirt, so I'll be sure to link that somewhere along here in case you're interested in seeing my handkerchief skirt with the zipper. Once I had the zipper in though, I just went through and finished off sewing that little edge so that the skirt would come together. I did not do a French hem for this. I decided to just keep it as it was and use my serger. Then it was just time for me to go through and kind of start to do the hem at the top so that the waistband would have a little bit. So I'm just going to go through, sew up this hem, and I just used a regular stitch for this. I want to keep it very simple as I am going to be adding a lining that will then be covering up like all of those raw edges so you won't be able to see it. And then at the bottom I am going to have to hem that as well. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to do that, especially with this fabric. And since this really is just kind of a mock-up, I want to see like what other new technique I could try to use. So now it was just time to add the lining to my skirt, which I did that one seam already for the waistband at the top, so I just actually folded that over so that it was covering the raw edge of the lining at the top and just pinned it all the way through. I just took a very straight seam all the way around, and this was how I added my lining to my skirt. And then you're going to see that there's like 2 edges on either side, and to get rid of those I just serged them so that it was nice and neat for the lining. And then once I had those 2 seams all serged, I did go ahead and go through and just very carefully hand stitch the lining to my zipper. That way I wasn't able to see any of the raw edges from the zipper, and this worked out as a really nice way to kind of clean up the rest of the skirt. So I just had to very carefully and take my time. As you can see, I was watching TV in the back, so it wasn't too bad. So now it's time to do that hem for the bottom. I tried to go around using my rolled hem foot, and it just started to look super messy, and I wasn't happy with how it was looking. So I decided to use a new technique and try to use this like blind hem foot that my little sewing machine presser foot kit came with, as I haven't used this before and it'd be something new for me. So I went around and pinned up all of my fabric so that it would lay correctly. There was a little tutorial, I'll see if I can find it to link, and that's what I used for how to pin up the fabric. And basically what I'm going to do is, so you see the pins, I'm going to be folding it over so that there's a little bit of the right side of the fabric and then the raw side of the fabric, and just take a seam along there. And then I'm going to be using my sewing machine with that new presser foot, and it's going to be folded down so that the presser foot will then be kind of sewing over. So here's the presser foot, and it'll be gliding along, and that should be able to get that blind stitch hem. And then I did unfortunately have to move the cat out of my sewing chair, as she thought that this would be a great place to lay in the sun, but I told her that I needed it so that I could do this little hem. So this was what it looked like when I had the whole foot set up on my sewing machine, and I think overall it worked out pretty well. I think that I may have needed to adjust the tension a little bit, as you could see the little seams and it wasn't neat all the way around, but this is the completed skirt. Overall, I think it turned out as a really great mock-up. I tried so many different techniques with it, and I think it was a great use of the fabric. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.